Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm one of the co-owners and managing directors with Impetus Digital. Thank you for all of you joining today. For those of you who don't know what Impetus Digital does, we have built some of the best in class asynchronous and synchronous virtual communication and collaboration tools for life science companies. So we help life science companies do things like virtual advisory boards, steering committees, medical education, investigator meetings. And since COVID-19, we've helped teams roll out their POA brand rollouts and sales rep training. But more importantly, what we really believe at Impetus is that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations, we can all collectively work together to truly and positively disrupt healthcare. So one of the reasons we've started this podcast and the YouTube channel that we have is because we want to speak to some of these leading edge thinkers, these digital entrepreneurs, these pharma leaders, and these provocateurs like Alan Birch and others who are doing things that are dynamic and interesting and new, so that we can all kind of look at what we're doing and say, is there more? Is there something else we can do? So I'm really thrilled to have Alan with us today. Alan, so happy that the technology worked out. We can all take a collective sigh of relief as we're doing this. So for those of you, I know many of you are attending know who Alan is, but he's had a very interesting background, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But he's an experienced drug access navigator. He has a demonstrated history of working in both the hospital and the healthcare industry as well. He is the founder and president of Drug Access Canada. It's actually a nonprofit organization that's focused on creating better access to medications for Canadians across this country. And this includes providing resources, education to healthcare providers, as well as advocating for the improvement of drug coverage through both public and private insurance. So Drug Access Canada is also advocating for the role of the drug access navigator. So it's a very specific role. We're going to talk a little bit about that today in the Canadian healthcare system, and the efficiency and the improved satisfaction that this role provides specifically. So prior to this current role, Alan was the president of ADANO. So this stands for Oncology Drug Access Navigators of Ontario, kind of a mouthful, but it's for short, it's ADANO. And he is also a drug access facilitator at North York General Hospital here in Ontario. Welcome, Alan. We're so happy to have you on this show.
Great. Thank you for having me, Natalie.
That's awesome. So let's actually kind of get started. For those who do not know who you are, I know you've been in the industry for a very long time, and anybody who is in oncology knows who you are. But you have a very interesting background, having started in pharmacy. So can you maybe kind of backtrack a little bit for us from the start of your career in the pharmacy space, how you ever ended up in the ODANO? And again, that's the Ontario Drug Access, the Oncology Drug Access Navigators of Ontario. So tell us about how you navigated into that trajectory to landing in ODANO.
Sure. So yeah, that is it's a very long name, and people often just use ODANO because it's too many words. But so I used to work at Princess Margaret Hospital in downtown Toronto. So I was working with cancer patients on a daily basis in the pharmacy, and there was a job posting for this job called a drug access facilitator. I had never heard of it before. Something you don't learn in school. So it sounded interesting, though. It was a role where you would help patients with their insurance coverage, and it's a complicated area for patients who are newly diagnosed with cancer. So I thought it sounded like a very interesting new sort of path to take. So I applied for the job at North York General and ended up as their drug access facilitator in the oncology clinic, and became a member of ODANO. And really, for the first year, it was just trying to understand the whole space of reimbursement of medications in Ontario, dealing with different patient support programs, insurance, different providers of insurance, different government programs, patient groups and kind of just seeing if there's anyone who's willing to pay for a medication for a patient that is in front of me. I want to make sure I know how I can get that for my patient. So we've been doing that for a while now, and it's becoming more and more complicated year over year. And there's more and more navigators year over year. So it's grown and grown since I started. And it's always interesting. Every day is a new project, basically.
I love it. And there's just so much to bite off there, especially since oncology, not just in Canada, but across the globe, is a very complex and convoluted process, therapeutic space. And there's a lot to dig in here. So let's actually just spend a couple of minutes before we even get into Drug Access Canada and what you're doing today. There's a lot to kind of pull apart with Odano and just some of the initial start of this, which has obviously transpired into an evolution of a completely new job description, role, opportunities, and everything that has transpired. So tell us a little bit about when you first got in that position with North York. What was the world like for a nurse navigator, and what was the purpose of having that? And keeping in mind, of course, that this actually originated in Ontario. So what was that like? And why was that position created in the first place?
Sure. So in the olden days, there was no centralized person to help with drug coverage and approvals for medication. So there would be times where a patient may come into the oncology clinic to start their new therapy, but it had not been approved. The forms for the approval from their insurance or from the government had not been submitted or weren't ready yet, and the patient can't start treatment. So they would have to go back home and wait. We can't use a lot of our products until they've been authorized by the private insurance or by the government. It's quite different in oncology, whereas if you're a senior in Ontario and you are prescribed a diabetes medication or something for cholesterol, you can just go to the pharmacy and you just get the medication, you fill the prescription. But when it comes to oncology medications and a lot of specialty drugs, it's not that clear cut. It has to be authorized. The drug has to be approved and has to meet criteria. And back when I started, the approval times would be like a week or 2 weeks on average. So it would not be clear cut if there was no one owning that process. There was no one designated to make sure that all of those things were taken care of. Should it be the physician or the pharmacist in the clinic, the nurse, the secretary of the physician? It was kind of just a hodgepodge of people trying to make sure it was all done. But there would be times where the approvals had not been put in place. And some patients would need to enroll with different programs like the Trillium drug program in Ontario. And that's kind of left up to the patient. So if there was any language barriers or anything was filled out wrong, it was kind of just who was supposed to facilitate that, who was supposed to help the patient to gain their drug coverage, even after it had been authorized. So there was kind of just no one centralized to do that. And the role of the drug access navigator came out of that need, where we found that, well, before me, but the people who facilitated the creation of the role found that it saved physicians time and money. It costs less money to have the physicians filling out different authorization forms and having someone else in the pharmacy doing that. So it really just made sense. Why do you have the physician doing that when it can be given to somebody else, and the physician can focus on time with their patients and other clinical work? So that content where getting approvals for medications was downloaded from the physicians to the Drug Access Navigator. And one of the things I've actually learned at Drug Access Canada is that in a lot of other disease areas where they have expensive medications like multiple sclerosis, it's still the physicians who are filling out these forms, a lot of forms, to programs like in Ontario, we have the Exceptional Access Program. They have to authorize a lot of the medications that are prescribed in oncology and other disease areas. And it's the physicians who are doing that. And it doesn't really make sense. Like as a drug navigator in oncology, I don't want my physicians to be filling out those forms. It doesn't make sense for them to burden themselves with all of that, when I can take that on and they can just see more patients or spend longer with their patients. Just to see it in other disease areas where it still hasn't evolved yet. That's one of the motivations behind Drug Access Canada. How can we get more DANs into these disease areas to free up physician time and save money to the system?
So we've kind of segued from Odano to Drug Access Canada. So I think that there's a lot we kind of need to fill in here before jumping to Drug Access Canada, which I think is now a Canadian-wide, all disease areas, kind of. And so I just kind of want to linger on Odano first, which was really the originations, which was oncology, and it was very drug access specific. But I think one of the core components here is, besides even just reimbursement and access, I think the patient journey was equally very difficult and complex for any kind of cancer patient to have to navigate, just with the number of people that they had to go see, and specialists and appointments and lab testing and nurse appointments and diagnostics, and on the list goes. Was the typical nurse navigator also educated on that, or was the focus mainly just on the actual reimbursement piece?
So I would say that in the typical cancer clinic, from beginning to end, from surgery to finishing treatment, everyone in the multidisciplinary team knows their specialty. So the people who are involved with the surgery part or with radiation, that part, like, they are very skilled in that, but you typically don't find someone who knows the entire process. It's just too complicated. There's too many moving parts. So everyone kind of just focuses on their own thing. And that I think that's fair, because everyone has their own skill set. So they use that to the best of their ability. And if there's something you don't know, you would just pass it along to the nurse or to the pharmacist or the physician, whoever's really the expert in that area. And when it came to reimbursement, there wasn't a designated specialized person. So there is now in oncology, and all of those people are part of the Odano network in Ontario. And just like any other group with nurses or with pharmacists, we provide a network where information can be shared amongst navigators. So when there's a new program or a new drug is reimbursed or a new drug has come to Canada, we can share information on that so that navigators across the province are all aware and skilled at accessing that medication and know the intricacies for their patients. So, like, I like to think of it as there's a patient in the middle of a pie chart, and they see all of these different healthcare providers, and they all have their focus. Like, if you have a particular concern that's for the dietitian, you go see that dietitian. If you have questions that are for the social worker, you go see them. But everyone has their focus and their specialty, and the drug access navigator is just part of that. That journey that the patient goes along, they'll start off seeing the secretary, then the physician. They may go for surgery or radiation, see a pharmacist in there, another nurse and another nurse, maybe the dietitian, social worker, but also they should be seeing a drug access navigator. I think that it's important that at the very least, if a clinic has a drug access navigator, that they're screening the patient. There might not be anything involved, but they should all be at least seen by a navigator to make sure. Because we do have situations where a patient may be seeing their nurse on their 4th or 5th treatment and say, it's becoming very cost prohibitive to afford this medication anymore. I've been paying $300 a month for it, and it was okay in the beginning, but now, I don't know if I can continue treatment. So that's something where if they had seen the navigator might be able to connect them with the program to cover that. And that's something the other parts of the healthcare team wouldn't know. The pharmacist, the social worker wouldn't know that there was a program that might be able to provide financial assistance for that medication they're taking, but the navigator would. So I think everyone kind of has their own space, and it's important to know what each person does. Like, we all know when to refer a person to the dietitian, but because our role is so new, people may not realize when they should be having referring a patient to the navigator, just to make sure that everything is covered. Because my goal is to make sure that if there's a patient going on treatment, that they're not paying anything for it if possible. Like, that would be ideal. If you have to pay, it's because there's literally nothing else we can do. But if there's a program or service out there that can help, then I want to connect you with that program so you're not paying anything for your treatment.
Oh, I think that's a wonderful vision for that. And really beautifully said. And I love the fact that you have the patient at the center, so a very patient-centric model in mind. So moving forward, so you've kind of gone from the drug navigator specifically in oncology and specifically in Ontario to basically a brand new entity. So tell us a little bit about how old Drug Access Canada is and what the focus is, and why did you decide to move this Canada-wide?
So we are about a year old. It's quite new. It's been in the works for several years, though. So when I was part of Odano as president for about 5 years, one of the things that I helped create was the Odano website. So it's odano.ca, and it has a lot of information on reimbursement in oncology for Ontario. So it's patient-focused information, because we got a lot of questions from patients. How do I get this covered? I bought this for my parents. Can I get my money back? And not even in oncology, we got a lot of questions from the public for people who had diabetes and all sorts of different disorders, and there was just no one out there really to help them. So the focus sort of just sprang from that. There was this need beyond oncology, and there was a need beyond Ontario. So I started meeting with drug access navigators in the other provinces. And when I went to the Atlantic provinces in BC and meeting with the navigators there who had been in their role for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years at most, their struggles were a lot like what we had dealt with in Ontario 10 years ago. So they were kind of starting from scratch, and there's a lot less of them. So I knew that they were struggling in a way that, at least in Ontario, with nearly 100 members, we could reach out to other centers and ask for support. If you're in a province with only 4 navigators, your pool is a lot smaller to find help. So it really came from trying to make sure that if we're so well connected in Ontario with drug access in oncology, and there's all these other spaces where people are not as connected and don't really know what to do, they're kind of siloed. A lot of the hospitals have just one navigator, so they don't really have anyone to turn to for help. How can we make sure that they are connected and they do have resources, they are brought to the forefront? It's all these challenges that we've dealt with in Ontario over the last 10 years. But how can we just use the skill sets that we've gained here and all of the knowledge from all of the dozens of members in Ontario to help the navigators in Alberta and in Nova Scotia and in Quebec, so that they can all be brought up to the same level and be as well resourced as we are in Ontario. So that's why we created Drug Access Canada. We want to sort of bring everyone up to a good level where everyone is as aware of all the different programs that are out there. I think one of the worst fears of mine would be if there was a patient who needed a particular medication in oncology and the physician maybe didn't know that there was a program for a new therapy that's being provided compassionately from a drug manufacturer, and says you can't get that. We're going to put you on to the standard of care treatment because we know that that one's funded and that's what you're going to get. But there actually was something else, and just no one told them. Maybe this center doesn't have a navigator, something like that. That's kind of what we really want to avoid. If there is a new therapy out there that's superior to the standard treatment, we want to make sure that you're able to get that, especially if it's being provided for free from the manufacturer. So how can we make sure that the hundreds of hospitals across this country are all brought up to the same level as downtown Toronto. We just want to make sure if you're a rural part of northern Quebec, you're just as aware of the newest treatment options as someone in downtown Toronto.
Fantastic. What a great program. And I love the segue moving into a more national perspective. So just like you ended up applying to that position as a nurse navigator, as a pharmacist, what is currently the model of how people move into the nurse navigator position and affiliate themselves with Drug Access Canada? I'm assuming Odano still exists, but it's being managed by somebody else. I guess you're sort of in partnership with, probably amidst other sort of provincial organizations or nurse navigator organizations as well, and maybe everything funnels up to Drug Access Canada. Tell us a little bit about the model around accreditation, or making this a standardized position that has legs and has respect and is paid in a specific way. And like you said, is considered a subject matter expert as part of the multidisciplinary team, so that equally patients are assigned to somebody at the beginning of their therapy and their treatment. So they're just as important and an integral part of the team as a dietitian or a social worker or anybody else. So tell us a little bit about the framework of how this role is transforming.
So it's a little bit of a mess. So every hospital kind of just figured out what to do with their role. I think a lot of them just kind of heard, well, that other hospital in our district has this drug access navigator. We need one too. So over the last 10 years, they've kind of sprouted up organically at different hospitals. The original positions were provided as pilot projects from drug manufacturers, and they caught on, and everyone who wasn't part of the pilots years ago has just hired them on because they've seen that they are effective in the clinics that had one. So, and then they added more and more. So some of the bigger regional centers have 3, 4, 5, 6 navigators in their clinics. But it really is whatever the hospital deems the position should be. So they may say, we're just going to designate someone who's already in the oncology clinic as the drug access navigator going forward. They might do an external hire. They might say, we want a nurse in this position, or we want a pharmacy technician in this position, or we want a clerical person in this position. And that's kind of been one of the challenges, is everyone has a different background as a navigator, because the roles have just been created organically. So one of the things we're trying to do at Drug Access Canada is to create standard training for everyone. We want to make sure that everyone is at the same level, and no matter what their background might be. And we're hoping that alone, at least to start with, will create more consistency. I think that it's something that when you step into the role, there is no formal training right now. There's no classes you can take online to learn about the reimbursement system. And we've done the best we could at Odano with the material that we've created on our website, and some animated videos to help sort of with basics. But the intricacies of it all are also constantly changing. So, this is something you really learn on the job. And it really helps if you have a healthcare background to step in and, make it a little bit more tolerable. But until we have more formal training set up and, a certification process at some point, everyone's doing the best they can. And that's worked well enough. But when we're looking at a national model, we do want to make sure that it's not going to take 10 years to get everyone to the same point. We want to make sure that everyone across the country is brought up to a level playing field, within the next couple of years. And that's one of the first things we'll be working on at Drug Access Canada, is a training module system that will be available online for free. And as hospitals hire new navigators or existing ones, they'll all be able to go through these modules. We'll keep them up to date as well on an annual basis. And that's kind of creating that floor. And that's where we're going to start from, at least, to make sure that anyone can say, you're a certified drug access navigator. You've gone through the Drug Access Canada training process. If you look at like oncology nurses, they'll do D'Souza training online. So we want to try to replicate something like that for reimbursement in different modules for different provinces and for different disease areas. But that would kind of be the baseline of what we're trying to start.
So how, obviously a lot of this data and this information, a lot of it is public, but a lot of it is also going to be coming from the life sciences, the pharmaceutical companies themselves. How can Drug Access Canada, or how is Drug Access Canada partnering with the various organizations, corporations, to be able to fill in and bolster this training program so it's always current, it's always relevant, and has the latest information, and working in concert perhaps with these life science companies, patient support programs, and other things that helps to buoy and support the patient overall in their journey through their condition?
So it's going to be a challenge for sure. There are a lot of stakeholders in this sector, and our website at drugaccess.ca is hoping to be a hub for all of that as much as possible. So one of the things that we started with, the foundation of our website, is we have charts for healthcare providers with all of the different patient support programs available in multiple diseases that have a lot of programs. So these are patient support programs run by drug manufacturers, and they provide various services to patients, like free drug or copay assistance for private payers, nursing callbacks on oral medications, or infusion services for IV therapies. So we created indexes for these programs, and there's about 200 programs in the diseases that we've started with alone. So it is a lot. There was nowhere where this information was stored before. There was no single place where you could go to find all the oncology programs from like Roche and AstraZeneca and Janssen. It was all just different places. You'd have to reach out to the company basically individually to find anything. So how can we make sure that this information is provided to healthcare providers quickly? We can't have people struggling to find coverage for one particular drug when there may be 3 or 4 that they're thinking about. That'll take hours to figure out, who do I even reach out to find this information? And if it's not available publicly on a website, maybe it's just too much. I have to see my next patient. I don't have time. So we created the Drug Access Canada website to be a quick, immediate place that a physician can log in and see, okay, that drug that I was thinking about is available compassionately. I'm going to bring the patient in now, and I'm going to get them enrolled into that program, and they're going to be on that drug for free. And that took me 15 seconds, It's something that we tried to make sure that physicians could just keep the website open while they're running their clinic, and they can spot the information, get the details that they need within literally just a couple of seconds, and they can make informed decisions for their patients. And it's not intended to say, this is what you should use. We're not trying to coerce them or prescribe for them. But if the physician says, I was at a conference last week and I really want to try this medication that looks great for pancreatic cancer, and is it available? Let me just check on the Drug Access Canada website, and it is. Great. So now I'm going to be able to use the thing I already wanted to use. So we're just providing quick information on stuff that physicians will already have been using their clinical judgment to choose. We're just telling them how they can get it. So it's almost like what a drug rep would be doing. But instead of having the physician struggle to know, who do I reach out to? I don't have time to reach out to somebody. They have the patients coming in next. They can literally find that information in a few seconds. So we're hoping that beyond just the patient support programs, but anything else that is of national significance, we're trying to steer away from anything that is specific to a particular region. That would be more for like the Odano group or other provincial drug access associations. But anything related to a federal matter or is universal across the country, we'll put that on our website. Links to different information on biosimilars, information on genomic testing, anything that's relevant in these areas, especially as cancer becomes more complicated. You wouldn't expect it to become more complicated, but it does constantly get more complicated. We have drugs that are tied to a specific gene. So if a physician says, I want to test for that, how do I even get the test to see if my patient has a particular mutation so that I can get them the drug that I'm thinking of or the new drug that's just come to Canada? So we have information on genomic testing so physicians can see what panels are available and make an informed decision on what to offer their patient instead of having to struggle and Google around to see where is this or where is that. They can see everything centralized in one spot so that, again, they can make quick decisions for their patients while they're running their clinic.
So that sounds fascinating. And I love the Canadian high level overview perspective. And then it gets scaled down at an individual provincial level. So just so I understand where the nurse navigator piece comes in. So are you suggesting that Drug Access Canada is more of the higher echelon informational platform? And then when it comes to actually assigning an actual human nurse navigator to a patient, is that done at the provincial levels?
So I would say that we are at Drug Access Canada open to any healthcare provider in the public sector. So we want to be able to help pharmacists or the nurses or the physicians, whoever is going to touch the patient along the journey. And reimbursement can come up at any point. It might be immediately when the physician's prescribing the treatment, but it could be down the road when the patient loses their job and the physician's already prescribed their treatment. We already know what they're on, but the access for that drug may change. Their company may switch insurance providers, or the patient support program that was giving them their drug for free is now closing because the drug is now publicly funded. So the reimbursement can change along the way while the patient's on their drug for a few years. So if we can get the patient or get the physician onto our website up front so that they can make their informed decision, that's great. But if it's 6 months down the road or 2 years down the road, and it's the nurse who's treating the patient or the pharmacist who is consulted that they need reimbursement assistance or drug access is changed for their situation, we want them on our website too. So really it's anyone along the journey, anyone who's part of that circle of care for the patient. That's who we want on our website, social worker, whoever. And what we are hoping is that once we see that there's a particular program that can now help with that patient who's lost their job due to COVID or whatever the situation may be, that it's probably going to be the navigator in the clinic who will be completing the enrollment process for that program or getting the drug authorized for the physician. But if it is if it's the nurse who's catching it in the clinic, that they can say, oh, there's a program for you. Let's just go and see the navigator and they'll get you into that program. So we can hand off from one disciplinary or discipline to the next. Maybe it's the social worker who's told, well, I can't afford this anymore. What am I supposed to do? Well, let's go and get you to the navigator and they will get you into that program. So really it's just to make sure that whatever healthcare provider catches this or is involved has the knowledge and the resources, but likely we expect it will still be a drug access navigator who's fulfilling that and getting the patient into that program because they would be the experts on the nitty-gritty steps and details involved. Whereas at least with the higher level information, the physician can initiate the process, but is the navigator who's going to fulfill it.
Absolutely. That sounds like a great plan. And I'm assuming that there's an increasing number of other sorts of therapeutic areas, obviously started in oncology. Oncology and rare diseases probably being the most complex of all, with all of the things that one needs to do to manage and sustain those patients. But certainly, it sounds like other cardiometabolic and other sorts of things like that are probably in your purview now as well too. So you're really kind of expanding the focus, which is really fantastic for patients. So it sounds to me like there's an opportunity around the patient centricity component. And one of the things that's becoming really prevalent, I think, especially since COVID-19, I think it's shone a light on the way that we're doing clinical trials.
Mhm.
And I think that there was an abrupt moratorium, unfortunately, when that pandemic happened, and we're still going through it, and potentially another lockdown going on across North America, Canada, the globe, and this may happen again. But I think it shone a light on the way clinical trials were being conducted. And then specific questions on the resiliency of them, specifically things like the clinical endpoints, being able to use things like real world evidence, being able to use things like patient reported outcomes, digital biomarkers, and using things like sensors and digital, biomarkers, and like using things like Fitbits and other sorts of things. How is Drug Access Canada involved with the clinical trial discussion and the evolution of this? And if it's not today, what is the vision for Drug Access Canada on that subject?
So that is another big topic for sure. So clinical trials, especially in oncology, are sort of the only way to get treatment sometimes. We end up with patients who have exhausted all of the publicly funded lines of therapy and they're still healthy and there's nothing else to offer them that is available on the market. So they end up going on a clinical trial, or there might be a brand new first line clinical trial for a drug that's much better than what we have on the market currently. And it's the new hot thing. So everyone, we really want to use that treatment for a patient if they're eligible and able to. So of course, that's part of the drug access component. And it is something that it would be useful to have information like that on our website at some point. We don't have that currently. It's not centralized either. I mean, there's clinicaltrials.gov, which you can, like a clinician can use to look up trials that are available. It's not exactly the most quick and easy thing to navigate. It has a lot of data. So, it'd be great if someone was to have a filter, some sort of a smart search where they could look through that and make it a little bit quicker and easier. Maybe we will. We'll see. But yeah, that is something that comes up quite a lot, especially at associations like CADIF, where real world data that comes from trials and from drug use is really important. And we know that the trials are not always the same as what really happens when we use a drug. We can be told constantly how a particular drug, the progression-free survival, for example, or the overall survival for a product. But when we start using it in the clinic, we don't necessarily see those numbers. And that's just the reality of trials. The patients can be picked, and the certain ones that we would see in the real world are excluded from those trials. So, I mean, that's a whole big conversation, definitely. But they are a resource. They are, in some ways, like a patient support program. If a drug manufacturer launches a program for a new drug on a compassionate basis, that's kind of like a trial. It's another way to get free drug, and we do use them quite a lot. But we do typically have trial coordinators at our oncology clinics. They would be more so the experts on what's available and the criteria for particular patients. But I guess you're right, there's a lot of overlap in ways between what they would do and what a drug access navigator would do. We're accessing medications for patients still, but different payers in the end. So yeah, I would say that that's something that we would like to see. But I think in our immediate short term, at least at Drug Access Canada, we're trying to just get more navigators out there and to even create awareness for the navigators. I think that in Ontario, we think that everyone knows about navigators. We've had them for so long. But when you look at the rest of Canada, they haven't. And one of the things I kept hearing was that navigators were just kind of not known. And I think that's kind of our immediate focus, is to just create awareness that this role even exists. And then hopefully we can move to more things like clinical trials and facilitating and making sure that those are working as best as possible for patients. I think it's the same thing with a patient support program. If you don't know the programs available, you don't get the medication. But if you're not easily able to see that there's a clinical trial for a drug, then that can also be an issue. The patient might miss out on something that they could have benefited from.
Absolutely. Yeah. So fantastic and great vision. And there's no shortage of options and partnerships and all kinds of other things that could be done. So it's always interesting that you can continue to expand and increase in your span of focus. So on that as well too, being an HTA country and more so joining in, and who knows what's going to happen in the US over time, especially with the new administration that just got inaugurated. So we shall see what happens there. But the question comes down to, is just like clinical trials, is there an opportunity for your I'm assuming this is a non-for-profit, non-for-profit organization, to get involved with, consolidating the works and the ideas from patients to be able to submit for things in with CADTH. So CADTH submissions and potentially being involved as it relates to other things. I don't know if it's, PCP with PCODER and CDR. But so is this an area that is a potential opportunity for a Drug Access Canada as well?
Definitely. So one of the things that happens when CADTH is doing their reviews is they collect clinician input. And that's something that we are hoping to target in the immediate reasonable future, to make sure that when drugs are submitted to CADTH and PCODER, that we can provide input. Very important, but I think that the reimbursement challenges related to a therapy are also important to highlight, especially when we're dealing with a lot of treatments that are not so clear-cut anymore. We're not necessarily dealing with a single agent that's coming to market and where it's given by itself. Increasingly, we're seeing therapies where it's given with another therapy, and those two therapies might be from two different manufacturers, or the therapy is tied to a companion diagnostic. So those are newer challenges that are really important involved with drug access. So I think that is something that we do want to be able to provide input on, and add our voice to that when they are collecting input from clinicians during this process. I think it's great to hear from physicians and why they want to use the drug, and patients who may have even been on the drug through trials. But I mean, if we bring this to market, what are the other challenges going to be? Is there a companion diagnostic associated with the drug, but that companion diagnostic's not funded? So really, how are people supposed to get the drug when you've only done half of it? You can't get the drug if you don't have the mutation, and we're not testing for the mutation. Or one drug from a particular manufacturer is being provided for free, but the other one isn't. Or the combination is not funded. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you get two rival industry players to come together and say, well, for the greater good, we're going to provide the drug for free when it's given with your product, even though we're competitors? How do you make sure that all of that is really highlighted, instead of just the clinical rationale of the product, but there's also a lot of logistical, getting it into the patient's hands, things that have to be really considered as well. And that's the forte of Drug Access Canada.
That's really cool. We should probably chat further because our asynchronous and synchronous tools can be used to actually help with some of those submissions. So
Perfect.
it's so interesting about you being a nonprofit because that's precisely where the sweet spot is. Um, so for newer products, companies, as you know, I mean, there's lots of discovery that's happening. There's still tons and tons of trials coming down the pipeline. And it's obviously, nonstop shortage of opportunities. Um, how does Drug Access Canada tap into things like patient registries? And how do you manage that tactically and carefully in terms of getting these kinds of products to the right people in the right way without kind of stepping on anybody's toes in the process? And how do you partner with the manufacturers in terms of accessing things like patient registries?
So there's a lot of people looking into that, and there's a lot of innovation being brainstormed from a lot of different people, and they have come to us. They've asked, how can we do this, or would this be useful? I don't think that that's something that we're going to be, building on our own or trying to build. But I think that like we're a very small group of people, and we have our focus currently, but I think that there's a lot of room for technology to help with that, especially when you look at things like big data. I've read a lot of books on how we can improve healthcare with big data. I know that they're looking at that more so in the US, of course, and things are a little bit slower to change in Canada. But there's a lot of room for improvement when everyone is so siloed, even just things that maybe you wouldn't expect to be. Your care can change from hospital to hospital to some degree. So how can we, break down those barriers and share information? How can we, and even if you want to, how do you do it? There's a lot of rules involved, of course, with patient confidentiality, and a lot of the tools that we use in healthcare they don't talk to each other. And I'm sure that was designed on purpose, but when it comes to one hospital with a particular system and another hospital with a particular system that are incompatible, there's no easy way to share data, and that's a problem. So I know that there's a lot of companies who are looking at ways to have like a cross-platform system set up, but then how do you get the data into that? So I think at some point this will be more along the way than it is right now. But I think that at least from Drug Access Canada's perspective, we can provide insight. We can share our experience and the logistics that we deal with on a daily basis in the oncology clinics. And I mean, if someone can use that to create a new tool that will better patient care, then we're all for that. So we're available to share our knowledge as much as possible. And hopefully that will lead to new technological advances where we can combine data and find new solutions from that.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, this idea of interoperability is certainly a mainstay. And the digitalization is certainly here, and it's here to stay. So it's great to see that people are working together on that, looking for an opportunity to create some data lakes, and then being able to tap in so we can start doing really smart things like population health management and predictive medicine and all kinds of things. Certainly, there's a whole other discussion, which is a whole other topic around bioethics and surveillance and data privacy and security, but that's for another day. And so, the idea here is that, there's lots of opportunities to connect and network and to bridge gaps with what you're doing. What have you found was the biggest challenges and also interesting opportunities when the pandemic overcame the country? What were some of the things that you saw, and how did this impact navigators, patients, and just generally Drug Access Canada?
So I think that what it really highlighted is how technologically starved we are in healthcare. I think, well, at least in my areas. So I think that we are, we get new tools on a regular basis. New programs come out in oncology and in healthcare and in hospitals in Ontario. And they fit a need, and there's just so much more room for improvement though. And one of the most frustrating things that came out of COVID was so many of the programs and services that we connect patients with require a physical signature. And when patients were no longer coming into the hospital, and if they did, they were allowed to bring just themselves. And suddenly I need them to sign a particular form to get into a particular program to get their drug. And their spouse needs to also sign that form for their insurance. That really highlighted how reliant we were on, paper. There are some hospitals that have moved more digital, like Humbert Hospital in Toronto is very digital, and the Vaughan Hospital, when it opens, will be very digital records for everything. So these new hospitals, as they're coming online, are quite digital, and hopefully that will, over time work out for the best. But for everyone else, there's mountains of paper everywhere, and there's a lot of hospitals that don't even have digital charts. So when you have a paper-based system and patients who are not even coming into the hospital because they don't want COVID, they have cancer, it really highlighted, what am I supposed to do? I have no other way of doing this. I can scan it and email it to the patient, but do they have a scanner? Do they have a printer? It really highlighted how chained we are to paper forms. And we found solutions, thankfully, by using electronic signatures, and that helped for the most part. But I mean, some patient support programs still don't accept verbal consent. Private insurance providers don't accept verbal consent. It has to be a physical signature, and you have to sign these forms. So it caused delays. There would be additional days to get things approved because it had to be manually sent to somebody. They had to figure out how to get it printed out, sign it, and send it back. On top of all of the other things that are happening that you highlighted before, there's all these different people calling them with scans and blood work and things that they've never had to deal with in their entire lives. Dealing with their mortality, the fact that they have metastatic cancer, how long am I going to live? And they don't remember to sign that form, right? So, I mean, it's completely understandable that the forefront of your mind is not figuring out how to get that form scanned and emailed back to the hospital when, I have to take time off of work, who's going to pay my mortgage. Those are your most pressing issues. But unfortunately, you can't start treatment without signing that form. So there was delays from that. And I mean, we're still dealing with it. Thankfully, we're able to use electronic signatures, things like Adobe eSign or DocuSign, where people outside of the healthcare system have been using these tools for years. Like, why would you need a physical signature anymore? Well, we do in oncology, or we do in healthcare, I should say. And that's just been probably the biggest frustration to me. And I mean, that's compounded. It highlights, again, a lot of the other issues that we deal with paper is we have to fax things. You're signing a piece of paper so that I can fax it to your insurance. And then they're going to print that fax and they're going to review the drug. And it's going to take you 2 weeks to have a decision sent to you in the mail. So there's so many wild things that we still deal with in healthcare that really should have been phased out a long time ago. I hope they are at some point in the near future. But I mean, there's like a YouTube video, at the turn of the millennium that said the things that won't exist after the year 2000, and a fax machine is one of them. But I use the fax machine all day long in the oncology clinic, and I receive faxes all day long because so many things have to be done on paper. They don't trust email. There's no secure portals to do a lot of these things. There's a few, but for the most part, I mean, if my fax went down, I would start to cry. Like, it is anxiety inducing if the fax goes down because we are so dependent on that. And I mean, there's so much room for improvement. If anyone wants to be creative and solve these issues, I'm all for it. But right now, like tomorrow when I go to work, I'm going to have to deal with electronic signatures and fax all day. So, I mean, it's just not fair to patients to have to deal with these delays during COVID on top of everything else. To, should I risk coming to the hospital to sign that document? Is there another way? Can you send it to my friend? Like, how am I supposed to do this? Should I tell my kids to help me with this? Like, it's just so, it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I mean, there sounds like there's just an incredible, I honestly, Alan, I could talk to you for hours. There's so much to go on here about this, and you are just a wealth of information. It sounds like a real opportunity for advocacy. And honestly, COVID-19 has been an accelerant in so many other areas. Again, my company's been virtual for 12 years. This is kind of a no-brainer, but we can see the issues because we are in healthcare around faxing and something as simple as e-consents. It boggles the mind, but it sounds like a real opportunity potentially, even for nurse navigators, for some advocacy work and potentially partnering with the pharmaceutical companies to changing the infrastructure and the legislation and the compliance concerns and fears that we just need to get our head around this into the 21st century and in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and potential future pandemics. I mean, e-consents are not going to go away, and there has to be a grappling and a comfort level with having digital and non-ink signatures. But so many other topics. That sounds like an exciting area for you, Alan, and congratulations for setting this up, forging ahead with a brand new area, creating the partnerships that you have. For those of you who would be interested in contacting Alan, we will be leaving links once we make and provide this video, and also will be on our YouTube channel. So you can connect with Alan if you want to look at talk partnership or get materials to him to educate and to get up on his website. He'll be happy to chat with you. And also feel free to connect with Impetus if you're interested in having some of these courageous conversations with your stakeholders, talking about things that are beyond the pill, or if you're looking at getting information to various other people or working with patients on getting submissions in for CADIF and other sorts of things. This is what our asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration platform does. We'd love to hear from you, or subscribe, or also like this video so other people can find our content as well. Thank you for all of your attendance. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Alan, and wishing everybody a wonderful day ahead.
Great. Thanks, Natalie.